Yes, thank you. My goodness. What more to say after all these brilliant interventions, but still I would like to highlight in my presentation some of the very important key messages that we synthesized in a policy brief that was recently developed by ESPON, using the inputs from our research teams, using the results of our new studies that very strongly argue in favor of an integrated place-based approach. And this policy brief that you can also see is available online presents some important elements of a stronger territorial approach and also our policy advice on the future of cohesion policy. Let me run you through those quickly to also allow, of course, some room for discussion after these interventions. So these are, from our perspective, on the basis of what our research teams advised, the main key elements of a stronger place-based approach as we see it. And I would like to start with the upper bubble: policies and interventions for functional areas. When we start speaking about a place-based approach, of course, the first question is, what is the place nowadays? Is it a local municipality? Is it a region? Is it a city? Is it a country? Well, the answer of ESPON is that they are functional urban areas, they are cross-border areas, they are transnational areas, because nowadays, as we all know, developments, they are not bound by administrative borders, and we do not stop at the administrative borders when thinking of the need to promote developments of different places. And of course, that makes cooperation, territorial cooperation among places, an imperative for territorial development. And therefore, we advocate for designing policy frameworks that incentivize cooperation, that support bottom-up initiatives for networking, that also provide financial incentives, that also, if needed, also foresee some legislative solutions to support initiatives of cities and regions to address joint development issues. We also advocate for the need to develop new governance solutions, and we will be speaking more about that also in one of the policy labs later today. And these governance solutions should ensure what we call a better spatial fit with the realities of territorial development, again, crossing administrative borders, and also that allow to engage public authorities and stakeholders in joint efforts to address shared development challenges. As you probably know, ESPON also recently finalized a research activity that is called SPIMA in our language, in our jargon, that also presented a very important policy advice on designing a metropolitan planning approach, and that also can help policymakers to think of new governance solutions beyond administrative borders at functional geographical scales. At the same time, what is important is, of course, to offer supporting tools that allow two things: financing joint investment and also combining different funding streams, different sources coming from different funding programs to support the implementation of local and regional development strategies. And finally, all of this, of course, requires strengthening the capacities of cities and regions to plan their development, to attract resources, and to implement their vision for developing their places. And I would like to highlight 4 types of capacities that become increasingly important. One is, of course, capacity to identify your development strategy and your vision. Another is to cooperate among places, and this, I have to say, is something that has been a weakness in the current practice, where experts and politicians tend to still think very much within their administrative borders, within their administrative units. to coordinate different subjects, different themes, different sectors within a development vision. And finally, that was also highlighted a number of times also in the presentation of Professor Barka, political leadership, the capacity to lead, the capacity to guide. And now if we come to more specific advice of ESPON on the future of cohesion policy and how to make cohesion policy closer to citizens, here I would like to highlight 4 points. First, what is needed within the cohesion policy is support to locally and regionally designed strategies. As I mentioned in my introductory speech, there is already a practice, there is an experience, there is competence to design those strategies. What simply is needed is support, further support for the design and implementation from cohesion policy resources. What is important at the same time is that those strategies, they cannot be driven by the availability of financing. So they cannot be subject to what is available as a funding source. They have to be based on a very clear understanding of your development potential, of your local and regional assets. At the same time, of course, there are a number of other principles that have to be followed. They require adopting a view on territorial development perspectives beyond administrative borders, also ensure horizontal cross-thematic integration. Very important are public-private partnerships and wide stakeholder involvement to achieve a real ownership and also practical implementation of those strategies on the ground. And of course, it also requires financial integration and the capacity to pool resources for implementation of those strategies. And finally, speaking about the strategies, you know, this is a foresight exercise. This is something that requires a capability of thinking about the future. And you know that very often we design our strategies with a more or less precise understanding of what happened in the past 10 years. But what is actually important is to understand what could happen in the future and how we can align to the potential future developments and how we can actually match those projections for a future development. And that's why, of course, we very much also encourage using foresight methodologies in designing those strategies. Another important point that we also highlighted in our main publication of last year, the EU Territorial Review, is related to the need to support joint investment both within Interreg and mainstream programs. Back then, last year, we called it mainstreaming territorial cooperation. That was partly misunderstood by some of our partners because they thought that we proposed to kill Interreg. No, of course, territorial cooperation is something that does belong to Interreg and will belong to Interreg programs. But we think that territorial cooperation practice has to go beyond Interreg and has to be supported also within mainstream programs. And this is not so easily done as I'm telling you now, because of course within mainstream programs the traditional, the usual, the normal practice was of course to finance investments within certain administrative boundaries, and there have not been that many solutions and practices of actually supporting joint investment projects. But we firmly believe that this is the way to also increase the visibility of investment, avoid fragmentation. So basically this is ESPON's answer on how to avoid fragmentation of a place-based approach and results of local investment, is to basically think of wider geographies, support joint investment, and also think about governance solutions beyond administrative borders. Of course, we also support the continuation of the integrated tools. It doesn't matter how you call them, ITIs, CLLDs, but here the main challenge is whether the new proposals will actually allow you to combine the different funding sources around your local and regional development strategy. In my ideal world, if I would be the one who designed a local and regional strategy, I would like it to be financed from ERDF, Cohesion Fund, from Social Fund, from Agricultural Fund, and I would then be motivated and encouraged to design a really integrated, holistic strategy that can then address also in an integrated, complex way all the aspects of urban-rural interconnections, finding ways how to connect with other places. But this is still, of course, a question and an answer that we are seeking to get in the process of negotiation. But as Professor Barka said, if you don't ask for 100, you don't get 70, right? And finally, of course, I have to advertise also all kinds of supporting programs that stimulate capacity building, and we believe that ESPON is, of course, one of them, and we think that one part of our missions for the future is indeed related to promoting more learning and more knowledge exchange among regional, national, and local stakeholders, and therefore, of course, we very much are looking forward to this discussion on the future of ESPON as well. This is all from me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.